Welcome to today's video. I'll be sharing about indecisiveness, what it is, where it comes from, and how to overcome it. Because truthfully, indecisiveness stops us from executing and taking action on something that usually we really care about. And because we're stopping that progression and not getting the feedback about, was it a good idea? Was it a bad idea? Did we make a mistake? How can we improve? Then we ultimately end up creating a stagnation in our life. We don't end up progressing. And so being able to be decisive and confident in your decisions is a really important skill to have for you to create any sort of life that you want, whether it's business, relationships, making a decision about where to take that next leap of faith, to take the next jump so you can progress. So what is indecisiveness? It is the fear or difficulty of making a decision. Now, that decision can be related to any area of life, but oftentimes people have more indecisiveness about the big decisions. In my private practice, the biggest areas of indecision are whether to stay or leave a job, whether to stay or leave a state, whether to stay or leave a relationship. So these are the areas where people feel the most fear and anxiety around making a decision. That's what indecisiveness is. I'm going to tell you also about the causes of indecisiveness and give you practical strategies and skill building exercises to allow you to overcome it so you're able to feel free in making a decision even if it's the wrong decision. Diving into the causes of indecisiveness. So a lot of times it's centered around the fear of the future, fear of failure, fear of a potential consequence of making the wrong decision, and any sort of distrust or anxiety you have in your own intuition and your own heart. Essentially, indecisiveness is coming from fear. And what the fear is sourcing from is the energy of anxiety, worry, and the idea that if you do not make the right decision, something bad will happen. Now, I say all this for you to be aware of the ways in which indecisiveness come up in your own life. So for me, there was a period of my life where I was indecisive, and particularly about a relationship. I could not decide if it was a relationship I needed to stay in. Certainly there was a part of me that was telling me to stay in that relationship. But then there was a part of me that just wasn't feeling like it was working. And so much mental energy went into trying to figure out, should I stay or should I leave? Should I stay or should I leave? Does this sound familiar to anyone? So like I said, moving states or geographical locations, leaving or staying in jobs, or leaving and staying in relationships are where indecision comes in the most. So what are you afraid of? Usually there's a part of us that tells us to stay in something because it's known, it's familiar, and it's comfortable, even if it's not a situation that allows us to grow anymore. What usually happens is it's not just preventing your growth, it's closing you in. And so is it the fear of the future or uncertainty? What part of anxiety or worry or fear is coming up for you in the decision that you're having a hard time making? This is something I just want you to reflect on and consider. So being able to understand the root of it is always helpful. Now I want to share a skill or a mindset that you can start to shift to help you make decisions in a more efficient, peaceful way. When we have a fear of an outcome, it makes us be really, really logical about all the things we need to consider in order to make that decision. Now, psychological research shows that when we have a big decision to make, so moving, leaving a work or a job, leaving a relationship, that those decisions actually should be the easiest. Because when we're listening to our heart and listening to our intuition and we trust it, then even if it's uncomfortable for a time, most people, when they listen to that input, they feel better for it. Again, all breakups are hard. Leaving a job can be scary. Moving out of state or to another place can bring a lot of fear. But if you're being guided by your heart and your intuition, then you are going to, in relatively short amount of time, in my experience, you're going to get that feedback that you've made the right decision. You're going to get that signpost. It might be a week, it might be a couple months, but a big part of overcoming indecisiveness is being able to connect and communicate with your heart and your intuition. Now, your intuition is that source of inspiration and guidance that comes to us. In my experience, my intuition kind of tells me through a soft urging. It's kind of like this peaceful nudging, almost like a really caring mother who's behind you saying, okay, just pay attention. It's not a harshness. The mind comes at decisions with harshness, and it likes to create a linear structure or like reasoning, advantages and disadvantages. That's the mind. And when we're listening to the mind with these big decisions, we're usually going to get really, really confused. So 90% of the time when someone comes to me and says, I don't know if this relationship is working for me. I've repeatedly asked for things to change and there's no change. But, we still have fun together. We don't fight all the time. I'll tell them, I think you know exactly what you need to do and you're just afraid to say it. And I ask them that question, and usually there's a part of them, and they don't always say it, but there's a part of them that says, I know this relationship isn't for me. And that's the heart, that's the intuition that comes out in these experiences. So the mind wants to keep us safe from fear and discomfort. Our heart wants to take us in the direction of our evolution, of our progression, and of ultimately our desires. And so think about that push-pull effect in your life. Are you afraid? And so you're using more logic. You're trying to understand from a really, really limited mental framework what to do. Or are you going to listen to your heart? If you have a hard time listening to your intuition or your heart, then I encourage you to get into a really quiet space. It can be at your house. It could be outside. It could be anywhere. Just you want to feel at peace. And just start to breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. This is not complicated. It's not a deep meditation. It's really simple. And then ask yourself a yes/no question and just notice what your body does. If you feel an expansion immediately upon asking a question, usually that's a yes. If you feel like a contraction or a closing, then that could mean a no. And so work with this practice. This is like allowing you to get into more harmony and alignment with your body, with the wisdom of your heart and the guidance of your intuition. Another practical strategy is setting a boundary on yourself. So the more room we have, the more choices we have, usually the more distracted and confused we get. So if we're not, holding ourselves accountable to making a decision, then we can certainly get into analysis paralysis where there's just too much to consider. So if you're in a conflict around something about, a decision that you need to make, set an accountability measure or a boundary for yourself. Tell yourself, this is the day where if I don't feel like this job is a yes, then I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to leave it. Set that boundary. And if you have a trusted resource, maybe it's a mentor, a therapist, or a friend, tell them your accountability. Tell them what you want to do. So the second we take it from just the internal aspect of our mind externally, there's something that happens that makes us seek and motivated to actually hold up that goal, especially when another person's involved. So if I know someone is taking a lot of space trying to analyze whether they should move roles, I'll suggest, when do you want to have this figured out by? Like, when is too long for you to be draining yourself of this energy? So when we have yet to make a decision about something and it's just running on the background, it might not even be conscious, it might be subconscious, but it's draining your battery. So think about a computer screen with all the tabs open. Now, the more tabs open, the more like processing power that takes and the slower everything is. So when we are at a standstill with making a decision, it's actually really, really draining our energy. And therefore, the cyclical effect of how hard it is to make a decision from that place really comes up. So set a boundary. There's a time to analyze, there's a time to consider all the options, but then there's a time to act. And so setting that boundary and holding yourself accountable to making some action that's stepping you outside of where you are now can be really helpful. Another key is once you take action, even if it's a small step. So you take action. Let's say your indecision is around a job. Now, you have been unhappy in your role for a long time, but you make enough money, it's kind of flexible enough, and insurance. Sometimes it always falls to insurance. When you've realized, okay, I'm no longer satisfied, and if I don't make a move, it's just going to get worse. So you set accountability and you say, in 1 month, if something hasn't changed, then I have to make a decision. And you decide that action that is supporting that decision is telling my supervisor that I'm unhappy. If you take that action and you ask yourself after, how did that feel? So when we're not taking action, we don't give ourselves the chance to reflect. And therefore, we don't really learn. So if you take an action and then you reflect, was it good? A good conversation? Was it bad conversation? There's an equation I like to use. It's not mine. I think it was created by Ray Dalio. Pain plus reflection equals progress. So that equation to me is the most helpful when it comes to indecision, because you ask yourself, is it life or death? What happens if it is a bad consequence? Then I'm going to learn. I'm going to have more information. I'm going to have more understanding, more knowledge, more wisdom after the fact. And so that reflection and that progression isn't really possible without action. You have to give yourself a couple ways to execute this decision to see what feedback are you getting. And it's only from that place that you can make more mindful and intentional decisions on how to move forward. Understanding indecision as basically a way that your mind is creating fear and overanalysis, fear of failure, fear of making the wrong decision, basically fear. And it's using the mind's favorite way, which is analysis and overanalysis, to create this turmoil and this inner discomfort and confusion, and that confusion drains us. So instead, recognize and say to yourself, I am being indecisive about this. I am having a hard time making a decision about this, but let me connect to my heart. Let me ask myself, what does my heart say? What does my intuition say? When you quiet your mind enough and you allow the guidance and the wisdom of those places to come forward, it helps you. And now the mind will still come in and try to create confusion. But if you just know the yes or no from the mind or from the heart and from the intuition, that's where you want to anchor. And then you set your boundaries, you hold yourself accountable, you take action, and then you reflect. Reflect. See how that was. The only way to overcome the mental limitation of fear is to gain the direct experience of what happens when you do follow your heart and your intuition. Has it led you somewhere better? For many years, I worked with someone who was engaged and planning a wedding, and she did not know if he was the right person, but they lined up in so many areas that she was still putting money towards the wedding and traveling with him and doing all these things. But She wasn't listening to her heart. And as a result, she had to start taking antidepressants because something was out of harmony. She had to start taking sleeping pills because she really wasn't sleeping. And she thought it was just the wedding. And then finally, something came to a head. And she said, this person isn't right for me. He is not the person that I really want to be with. I held her accountable to that piece, that she made that decision. And once she acted on it, she went through the grief of losing a fiance, of having to rescind all the invitations. She needed to apply courage, and she needed to feel empowered during that whole stage. She also needed to feel a lot of support. But a couple months later, she became the best version of herself I had ever seen. And that's the power of listening to your heart, of listening to your soul, of quieting your mind and making the decision. Because at the very least, you learn. You make a mistake, you get better. You reflect, you grow. Thank you for watching today's video. If you found any value in it, I encourage you to look at my channel and to see all the other videos I have up for you. Thank you again for watching. I'll see you soon.